The papers were already on the table when I walked into the kitchen that morning. Not hidden. Not tucked under anything. Just sitting there next to my coffee mug, like they were part of the routine, like divorce was something you did before checking your email. My husband was leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, and he didn't even look up. "I need you to sign those today," he said. "My attorney says the longer we wait, the messier this gets." I stood there in my bathrobe, hair still damp from the shower, and I looked at the stack of papers. 31 pages. 12 years. And he was worried about his timeline. "Before you say anything," he said, and now he looked at me. "I think we both know this hasn't been working for a long time." I didn't say anything. I picked up my coffee, took a sip, and read the first page. His name was Elliot. Mine is June. Though I suppose you already know that. We met in our mid-20s at a mutual friend's birthday party in Chicago. He was charming in that specific way that reads as confident when you're 26 and you don't yet know the difference. I was finishing my CPA license. He was 3 years into a mid-level finance job, ambitious and funny and very, very good at making you feel like the most important person in the room. We got married when I was 28. I had Piper a year later. And for 4 years after Piper was born, I did what we agreed I would do. I stepped back from my accounting work, scaled to freelance, then to nothing, while Elliot's career kept climbing. We moved from Chicago to a bigger house in the suburbs outside Cincinnati. I drove Piper to preschool and made sure the fridge was stocked and learned how to do taxes for 3 different small businesses from home, just to feel like I still existed professionally. Elliot came home late and went to work early and told me when I complained about being lonely that I didn't understand the pressure he was under. I thought I was being patient. I didn't know that for the last 2 of those 4 years, he had been seeing someone named Brianna, that she worked 2 floors above him, that she had, according to the documents his attorney provided as part of the asset disclosure, been listed as a co-signer on the lease of the apartment he'd been renting on the other side of the city. An apartment I had never known about. I signed the papers that afternoon. Not because I was defeated. I signed them because I had been waiting for this moment for 8 months. Since the afternoon I found a receipt in his jacket for a restaurant we'd never been to together, followed by an address I didn't recognize, followed by a conversation with a private investigator named Mr. Holloway, who became, over the next 7 months, the most useful person in my life. While Elliot had been building his exit, I had been building mine. I called my mother that evening after Piper was in bed. She lived in Toronto. She'd moved back to Canada 3 years ago after my dad passed, back to the city where she'd grown up. She answered on the second ring the way she always did, like she'd been expecting it. "He signed," she said. "I signed," I said. "He handed me the papers this morning." There was a pause. Then, "Come here." I had been thinking about it for months. I had a Canadian passport, dual citizenship through my mother, which I'd almost let lapse twice but never actually did. I had a job offer from a mid-sized accounting firm in Toronto that my mother's neighbor had put me in touch with 6 months ago, when I'd first started, quietly, carefully, reaching out. The offer was real. The salary was more than I'd made before Piper was born. And Toronto had a bilingual daycare program 3 blocks from my mother's house that had a spot opening in September. I had not told Elliot any of this. I had not touched the joint accounts, not yet. But I had my own account at a separate bank, opened 18 months ago with the freelance money I'd been quietly routing away from our shared expenses. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough to get Piper and me to Toronto and cover 3 months of rent while I got my footing. 2 weeks after I signed, I told Elliot I was moving to Canada with Piper. He looked at me like I'd announced I was joining a cult. "You can't just take her to another country," he said. "The divorce agreement allows for relocation with 30 days' notice," I said. "You agreed to that clause. Your attorney drafted it." He had not read 31 pages. The night before our flight, I sat on the edge of Piper's bed while she slept, and I watched her the way you watch a child when you're about to change everything and you're not entirely sure you're not making a terrible mistake. She was 4 years old, and she smelled like the strawberry shampoo she'd decided was the only acceptable shampoo in the world. Her stuffed rabbit, which she called Crumbs, was tucked under her arm. I had arranged for my mother to fly down to Cincinnati 2 days before our departure, specifically so that she could stay with Piper while I handled the last of the logistics. Piper had not been left alone for a single night. I want to be clear about that. My mother slept in the guest room and took Piper to the park and made her pancakes shaped like animals. And when I finally got everything packed and the movers squared away, I came home to find them both asleep on the couch, with a Disney movie still running on the TV. That image, my mother and my daughter small and unbothered and safe, was the thing I held on to on the plane. Toronto in October has a specific quality of light that I had forgotten about. gray and low, and somehow softer than gray should be. We landed on a Tuesday morning, and Piper pressed her face against the window as the city came into view and said, "Is this where Grandma lives?" "Yes," I said. "This is where we live now." My mother was at the arrival's gate. She had made a sign out of cardboard that said Peeper in glitter letters, and Piper shrieked when she saw it with a pitch that made the people around us startle and then smile. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment 6 blocks from my mother's house. It was small. The kitchen had exactly one drawer that stuck, but it had big windows and hardwood floors, and a radiator that clanked at night in a way that I came to find oddly comforting, like the building was sighing. I started at the firm in November. My title was senior associate, which felt slightly optimistic given that I'd been mostly out of the workforce for 4 years, but my first week made it clear that the skills I'd kept sharp through freelance work had not actually deteriorated. Numbers don't change. Audit trails don't change. The way a company's books tell a story when someone doesn't want them to, that doesn't change either. My supervisor was a woman named Theodora, early 50s, the kind of person who speaks quietly and means everything she says. She handed me my first client file on a Wednesday morning and said, "I heard you're thorough. Prove it." I proved it. The client was a mid-sized logistics company that had been flagging some irregularities in their vendor payment accounts. Theodora wanted a full reconciliation. I spent 2 weeks on it and found $340,000 in redirected payments that traced back to a ghost vendor account, and it existed on and nowhere else. The managing partner called it the cleanest forensic trace he'd seen from someone at my level. I wasn't thinking about Elliot when I found it, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel like something. Back in Cincinnati, Elliot had moved Brianna into our old house, which was part of the settlement. He got the house, I got cash. Within 3 weeks of my departure, I knew because Piper mentioned, during one of her Sunday video calls with her father, that Daddy's friend had a room with a lot of pink in it. He hadn't told Piper about Brianna in any direct way. He just moved her in and apparently expected a 4-year-old to adapt. Piper adapted. Children are more resilient and more perceptive than adults usually give them credit for. She came back from her first visit to Cincinnati. Elliot had flown her down for Thanksgiving, with my mother accompanying her as we'd agreed, and she told me very seriously over dinner that Daddy's friend Brianna smells like the candles at the dentist. I hid my smile in my wine glass. What I did not know, through the fall and into the winter, was that Brianna was pregnant. I found out the same way I found out most things about Elliot's life at this point. Through Piper, who was an unintentional but reliable source of information. She mentioned in January that Brianna's tummy was getting big and that her dad had said there was going to be a baby. I put Piper to bed that night, and then I sat on my couch for a long time staring at nothing. I'm not sure what I felt exactly. It wasn't quite jealousy. Elliot and I were done, genuinely done, and I didn't want him back. It was something closer to grief. Not for the marriage, but for the version of my life where none of this had happened. Where I had not spent 4 years disappearing into someone else's story. Then I opened my laptop and answered 3 emails and went to bed. February brought a development that I had not anticipated. Theodora called me into her office on a Thursday morning and told me that the firm had been retained to assist with a financial fraud investigation for a company called Ashford Capital, a private investment firm based in Cincinnati. The FBI has a forensic lead, she said, but they need additional support on the accounting side. A name came up in connection with the primary suspect. "Do you know an Elliot Marsh?" I went very still. "He's my ex-husband," I said. Theodora looked at me for a moment. "Is that a conflict?" "No," I said. "It is not." The investigation had started 18 months earlier, before our divorce, before I had any idea, when a whistleblower inside Ashford Capital reported that someone in the mid-level finance team had been systematically diverting client funds through a series of overlapping shell accounts. The amounts were not small. By the time the FBI had traced the structure, they were looking at just over $2 million over a period of 4 years. 4 years. The same 4 years I'd spent at home with Piper. I was not assigned to the case directly. Theodora made the judgment call that my personal connection made that inappropriate, and I agreed with her completely. But I was in the building when the pieces came together. I heard the summary. I knew the shape of what they had found. Elliot was arrested on a Thursday morning in March. I know because his mother, a woman who had never once been warm to me but who apparently had my number memorized, called me at 7:15 a.m. while I was making Piper's lunch. "Did you know?" she demanded. Not hello, not even my name. "Good morning," I said, and kept spreading peanut butter. "Did you know what he was doing? Before you left?" I thought about the 8 months I'd spent quietly building a new life while Elliot thought I was simply enduring the end of our marriage. "I knew enough," I said. "I'm sorry this is happening to your family." I hung up and drove Piper to daycare. Piper's daycare provider, a warm Haitian-Canadian woman named Celestine, who Piper called Miss Cece, asked me if everything was okay when I dropped her off. I must have had a particular look on my face. Complicated morning, I said. Complicated is just the word for things that are actually very simple but take a while to untangle, she said. I thought about that for the rest of the drive to work. Elliot's case went through the federal system slowly, the way these things do. His attorney negotiated. The amounts were undeniable. The paper trail was meticulous, almost artistically so, which I found darkly ironic given that it was the same quality of financial record-keeping that I'd made my career on. He eventually pled guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of money laundering. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for May. I was not there. I had no reason to be. And more importantly, I had a quarterly review to present that morning for a pharmaceutical client whose account I'd been managing since December. But I heard about what happened at the sentencing hearing. Not from Elliot's mother, who had stopped calling. From Piper, who was too young to be there, but who overheard a phone call between her grandmother and someone else during a visit. She came home and told me, very matter-of-factly over chicken nuggets, that Daddy's friend Brianna went to the doctor and the baby has a different daddy. I set down my fork. Who told you that? I asked carefully. Grandma was on the phone, she said. She was really loud. I later pieced together what had happened. Brianna had been asking Elliot for more financial support during the pregnancy. This was before the arrest became public, back when she still thought there was money. When the investigation became visible and Elliot's assets were frozen as part of the federal proceedings, Brianna apparently requested a paternity test through her OB as part of establishing legal parentage for child support purposes. The test came back with results that did not match Elliot. She had been seeing someone else, someone at the same company, a colleague in the same office, for at least part of the period she'd been with Elliot. The timeline of the pregnancy, when examined against the DNA results, made it clear that the child was not his. Elliot found out in the same window of time that he was also facing federal sentencing. I have tried to imagine what that week was like for him, and I genuinely cannot. At his sentencing hearing, which I have since read the public record of, the judge acknowledged his guilty plea and the cooperation he had offered investigators. He was sentenced to 31 months in federal prison, with 3 years of supervised release to follow and full restitution of the diverted funds. 31 months. The same number as the pages in our divorce agreement. I noticed that later and thought it was the kind of detail that belongs in a book. Through the spring, I was promoted. Not formally, not yet, but Theodora started including me in partner-level client briefings, which is the organizational equivalent of being handed a key and told not to mention it. I started to understand that the 4 years I'd spent at home had cost me professionally in ways I'd underestimated, and that I was now making up for them at a pace that surprised even me. Hunger does that. Grief does that too, when you metabolize it correctly. Piper started kindergarten in September. She wore a dress she had chosen herself, navy blue with small yellow daisies, and she carried her backpack with a gravity that made her look approximately 40 years old. My mother came to take photos. Celestine waved to us from across the parking lot. I stood outside the school after Piper went in, and I didn't move for a long moment. I thought about the morning Elliot handed me those papers. The way he'd been leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. The way he hadn't looked up. I thought about the 7 months I'd spent quietly dismantling my dependence on a life that was already ending without my knowledge. The private investigator. The job offer I hadn't mentioned. The passport I hadn't let lapse. I thought about Piper, inside those school doors right now, probably introducing herself to someone she didn't know yet. My phone buzzed. It was a calendar reminder for a client call at 9. I put my sunglasses on and walked to my car. The city was loud and bright and cold in the particular way that Toronto is cold. Clean and direct and completely indifferent to whatever you're feeling. I had come to love that about it. No one here knew who I had been before. They only knew who I showed up as. That version of me had a 9 o'clock call, and she was not going to be late. In the months since, I have been asked. By my mother, by a therapist I started seeing in the spring, by my closest friend from college who flew up to visit last summer, whether I feel angry, whether I'm still carrying it. The honest answer is that I feel something much quieter than anger. Something that took me a long time to find a word for. It's clarity. I can see the last 12 years clearly now. I can see the choices I made that were mine and the ones that were shaped by someone else's version of who I should be. I can see the 4 years I spent smaller than I needed to be. And I can see the 8 months I spent, quietly and deliberately, becoming someone who would not be left behind. Elliot made choices that destroyed the life he thought he was building. Brianna made choices that unraveled her own plan before it had a chance to take shape, and I made choices, quieter, slower, less dramatic, but mine, that landed me here. Here is a 2-bedroom apartment with a sticky kitchen drawer, a firm where my work has value, a daughter who is learning to read and still insists that Crumbs the rabbit sleeps on her left side, never her right. A mother 6 blocks away who answers on the second ring. Last week, Piper drew a picture at school and brought it home rolled up in her backpack like a diploma. She unrolled it on the kitchen table and smoothed it flat with both hands and announced, "That's us." It was 2 figures in front of a building, one tall, one small, with a big orange sun in the corner, and what appeared to be the sticky drawer kitchen visible through a window. I taped it to the refrigerator. It's there right now, between a grocery list and a photo of Piper and my mother from last Thanksgiving. That picture is the most accurate thing anyone has ever made of my life. And it took losing everything I thought I had to earn the right to be in it.